right.
We can start chapter 5 or 6.
Chapter 6.
Mhm.
All right. So, this passage is doing a lot of heavy lifting, unfortunately. So we're going to have to
Okay.
get through this. So it says, when men began to multiply on the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, God's sons saw that men's daughters were beautiful, and they took any that they wanted for themselves as wives. Now, before we move on, let's take a little bit of a closer look at that phrase right there. When humanity began to multiply on the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, God's sons, that would be B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. And that's what it says in Hebrew, B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. Saw that the daughters of men, so, and that's quite literally Adam's daughters, that they were beautiful, and they took any that they wanted for themselves as wives. Remember, just a couple chapters before, we have Lamech, who's taking multiple wives.
Right.
And he is perverting that idea that husband and wife should be companion to one another, that they should help and strive together. And he takes multiple wives as consorts rather than companions. And here we're seeing that the same thing is happening on what is presumably a spiritual level. Because what does it mean, the sons of God? It's a phrase. It's a phrase that has multiple possible meanings, but it's left here completely ambiguous. But they take whomever they want as wives. And so where Lamech had done something horrible, they're now doing something abominable. And the Lord said, my spirit will not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh, so his days will be 120 years. So in the previous genealogy, we saw that the number of years were descending each generation for the sons of Seth, but for the sons of Cain, it gave us no indication at all what their years were. And here God finally says that his spirit will not be with them forever, because he is also flesh. Now, another translation I read today said, because he is mortal. So his days will be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that, when God's sons came into men's daughters and had children with them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So this tells us who the Nephilim are in a very vague sense. It says that they were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. And men of renown here is a word in Hebrew that is translated elsewhere as champions. So when we see this come up again in 1 Kings, it's translated there as champions. That's who the Nephilim are. And we have this very weird passage, and we have to make sense of it somehow. And one of the ways of making sense of this is thinking about who these people could be. They're champions, they're heroes, they're legends, they're the mighty men of old. And what does of old mean in, say, 2000 BC? You know, we're talking about something that's being written at the same time as the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, we could definitely draw a parallel here. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 God and 1/3 man. He was definitely a mighty man of old. He was definitely a hero, like Hercules, who was half God and half man, or Achilles, who was dipped into the river Lethe and made basically immortal, but not quite. These are the heroes of old in the time of the Bible. It's almost certain that when Moses is writing these words, he's thinking about the myths and legends of the people in the lands that he's leading Israel into. And so he's thinking of the legends of Egypt. He's thinking of the legends of Greece and of Canaan and of Sumeria. And he knows that they're going to be hearing all these myths and legends, and they're going to be telling these stories. And in fact, this flood story is repeated in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So we know he's thinking of the Epic of Gilgamesh because that's where this story comes from. And just like Jesus told mythical stories, like the fisherman and his flute, he took that from Aesop's fables. He took stories that people knew and he gave them a bit of a twist. Moses did the same thing. We know that the flood story is much older than the Bible. And Moses takes this story and puts it front and center in the mindset of the people that he's leading. And he says, now this is a myth, yes, but it's a myth that we're going to make front and center, part of our cultural identity. And he knows that the people are going to be hearing the myths and legends of these other cultures in the land that they're going into. We'll see that in Deuteronomy. He gives just an amazing speech about this. But he doesn't want them to be buying into those myths. He says, yeah, those are the Nephilim. They were of old. And then God sent a flood and he washed them all away. The God that we serve is so much greater than those myths and legends that they're not even worth retelling. At least that's one way of taking this passage. So here we see God kind of getting his plan together for how the world is going to work. And it says in verse 5, the Lord God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was continually only evil. So just like with the genealogies, we saw that Seth's genealogy was the ages of each person was growing less and less, and Cain's sons were multiplying on the earth, and now we have this perversion of the natural order, right? We have sons of God, which sons of Elohim, it could even be translated as the sons of the gods.
Who is?
Hmm?
Are you saying da God?
The gods, as in plural.
Okay.
Just like Hercules is the son of Zeus and so on and so forth. You have the demigods and the sons of gods, if we translate it that way, would make sense. There are certainly references to other gods in the Bible, but they're never seen as being on equal standing with God. There are many Elohim, in other words, in the Bible. There are spirits that are called gods, but they're not like God. And so here we have this kind of perversion of the natural order. Spirits that God created to basically be the stars in the sky, to be guides of the world, but to also be nameless because they serve to point to God. And here they decide that they will have a legacy of their own. So they have children with women they clearly don't respect. And so there's a lot going on in this passage. We could spend all day just tearing apart all the different ways that it could be taken. But it's almost certainly mythical, and it's meant to interact with the mythologies of the religions around it. And so we have several different sources of wickedness in the world here. We have that humanity's own wickedness that comes from our own hearts. We have this supernatural source of wickedness in the world. And we have two lines of humanity, right? The sons of Cain, the sons of Seth. We see the sons of Cain who are saying that God will bless us the more we sin, and the sons of Seth who are slowly becoming less and less righteous. Until it comes to a point where it says that the thoughts of man's heart was continually only evil. The Lord was sorry he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. The Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the surface of the ground, man along with animals, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the Lord's eyes. This is the history of the generations of Noah. Now, once again, we have that generations, and it's pointing to a history, because when this was written, there was no such thing as a history. Kind of interesting to think about that. There was mythology, but no one had yet written what we would think of as a history, except for a family genealogy. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. Noah walked with God. And here we have something interesting, that Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless among the people of his time. It's an interesting thing to think about, because God hasn't given the law to Moses, right? He hasn't walked and talked with humanity since the days of Enoch. And maybe then not in the same way that he walked and talked with Adam and Eve. And so when it says Noah was blameless among the people of his time, it gives us an idea of what that means for Noah to be blameless. It doesn't mean he's blameless in the same way as someone who's judged by the entire law, or in terms of someone that has received the gospel. He's blameless in a way that applies to his time. And it gives us an idea of how God judges us. Because we're not judged by some arbitrary rule that was handed down long ago, or one that's coming in the future, or one that, well, maybe we should have known. He's blameless amongst the people of his time. So according to the information he had available, according to what he was capable of, according to where God had put him. In other words, Noah did the best he could with what he had.
I think he was also probably um, admired for who he was and how he comported himself.
Mhm.
You know, in those days in the area they lived in. I think that has a lot. People tend to have a tendency to look at in front of them when someone does does the right thing, perhaps does a good thing,
Mhm.
in another way. So to me, it comes really from around the people that and how they see you.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think when I'm reading things that are historical, I love reading accounts of people who are progressive in their own time,
Me too.
but they're never progressive in our time.
Mhm.
You might read things that are, you might read someone who is arguing for breaking down barriers of race and class and gender, and but the language that they use we would not consider acceptable in public discourse today, but they were righteous in their time. You know, they were they were moving they were moving us in the right direction. They did the best with what they had. And I always love reading these things with young people because they grew up in a world where that wasn't acceptable. They didn't grow up in a world where they read things that were old.
True.
you know, they they're new and they love new ideas and they've only read new ideas. And it's always fun exposing them to old ideas.
I kind of want to digress for just a second. That kind of reminds me of what happened in one of the meetings where um, it was Chart Petty. While it was Chart Petty, and they were talking about um, the different generations.
Mm.
And there's only three of us, Rita, I, and Dave,
Mm.
who are really what they call the older generation. And then they started telling us about Gen X and this, I
Oh.
mean, the age levels and what they believe and whatnot. And Pansy was very adamant about, yeah, this is the way, our generation. This is our generation, and this is what we believe in, and this is what we do, and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
Not for a leader taking that in context. Should you do that? I mean, yes, you can express that, but you have other people in the group that are different generations,
Mhm.
and do we? And see, that's kind of the thing that kind of, to me, I didn't feel real comfortable about that,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to address anything like that. I just wanted to hear what they were saying. And
Yeah.
already the fixation, that ideation that that group has is
Mhm.
Vance's group is that okay? So this is the way, this is how she comes across to me. I'm not speaking of everybody else in the
Mhm.
group. The idea is that this is where we are, so you can't touch us. We're just, this is where we are,
Mhm.
and you can't really, change anything. In other words,
Yeah.
but my thing is, if you're going to do that, you have to think about collectively what the totality of the group is and what the reason we are there for.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Well, you have to also respect that people
Yeah.
come from different,
Yeah.
grew up in a different time
Mhm.
and have a different way of looking at the world.
Mhm.
And, when you're very young, you think
Yeah.
you have a very limited way of looking at the world because the
You
world is
haven't-
very new to you.
Yeah.
And part of being a leader is pulling people along,
Yes.
you know.
That's right.
Um,
It's not divisive. You cannot divide. There's no room for
Mhm.
divisiveness
right,
when you have a group like that.
right.
And I think that Dave supported because I said something about that, and
Mhm.
he said, yeah, it's like we seek as the older generation. For me, number one,
Mhm.
I'm only speaking for me. Respect is my big thing
Oh, yeah.
because that's how we grew up.
Mhm.
We were told in our generation that you listen,
Mhm.
You listen, and that's all you can do is listen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how my father raised me.
Mhm.
You listen and you absorb, but you cannot, you cannot say a word. You just unless you're asked about it. You just unless you're asked about it.
Mm.
And so when you grow up like that, my whole vision is that I can hear you. I hear you. I hear you need your wants and your desires and where you want to go. I said, but the first thing you need to understand, we need to be pulled along with that picture.
Yeah.
And you need to start looking at us with respect.
Mhm.
And the first time I went to one of the meetings, I was appalled.
Mm.
All the FU words and this and that, some of them
Oh,
were
boy.
and really, did I really need to be there? Did I really need to say something?
Mhm.
Being a newbie to the group, I just kept my mouth shut because I thought, well, this is the way it's going to be.
Mhm.
I'm just going to hear it out and
Well,
then do
you
what I
know-
need to do.
Well, maybe I'm biased because I make my living
Yeah.
looking at old ideas. But
Yeah.
sometimes the best ideas are truly ancient.
Right. That's right.
And we are all very young, and all our ideas are very young in comparison to what these very old ideas are. And here, Moses is reading something. He's talking about Noah. He's talking about this myth that to him is an ancient myth. But he's not going to pull people along unless he takes that myth and he puts a new spin on it. And that's what every generation needs to do, to take the story of those who came before and just keep it moving forward. That's what I feel I do
And
in ministry, is I look to my elders, I look to my uncles and aunts
Right.
and grandparents who taught me the scripture and taught me to revere the word.
that's why we're here.
Right. And I was very lucky to have a family that all revered the word and all also respected each other's perspectives enough that we don't all see eye to eye. We don't all, and I'm pretty sure if my grandmother watches this video, if my uncle watches this video, if my dad watches this video, they're all going to disagree with the ideas that I come up with in scripture. I'm going to tell you, you really should have said this. I'm going to hear it. But the thing is I've listened to all those perspectives. And if I think that they're worth putting forward, if I think someone will benefit from them, then I put them forward. And I keep building on those stories and on those perspectives. And I hope someone does that with my perspective after I'm gone. But all right. This is a story not about beginnings, but about endings, of course. It says, I will destroy man whom I have created from the surface of the ground, man along with animals, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I'm sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This is the history of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless amongst the people of his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So how was the earth corrupt? It was filled with violence. God saw the earth and saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. God said to Noah, I will bring an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them and the earth. Make a ship of gopher wood. You shall make rooms in the ship, and shall seal it inside and outside with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ship shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a roof in the ship, and you shall finish it to a cubit upward. You shall set the door of the ship in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third levels. I, even I, will bring the flood waters on this earth to destroy all flesh having the breath of life from under the sky. Everything that is in the earth will die. But I will establish my covenant with you. You shall come into the ship, you, your sons, your wives, and your sons' wives with you. Of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ship, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of the livestock after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. 2 of every sort will come to you, to keep them alive. Take with you some of all food that is eaten, and gather it to yourself, and it will be for food for you and for them. Thus Noah did. He did all that God commanded him. So here we see Noah building the ark, and its dimensions, by the way, are described in the same way as the dimensions of God's temple. They're described in the same order that we see in, I believe it's First Kings for God's temple. And it gives us the same amount of detail. It should have three compartments, a door, and a window. And this is all we're told. And it's not enough information to build a ship. Notice the ship doesn't have any way of steering. There's no rudder. There's no sail. God doesn't tell him to build any of that. It's a box with a door.
Right.
And Noah doesn't gather the animals here. God gathers the animals, but he tells Noah to gather food. All food that is eaten, which is kind of a strange phrase, but it tells us that there is food that is not eaten, right? That there are things that are edible that at that time they do not eat. So when we read later that Noah sacrifices the clean animals, it may be clean in the Levitical sense, right? In the idea that the food is kosher.
Right.
Or it may not. Because we're told Noah is judged by the standards of his time. And those laws haven't been given yet. So it may be that the idea of clean and unclean means something different in Noah's time. But there is definitely an idea there. Because here it says, take with you some of all food that is eaten. So the Lord said to Noah, come with all your household into the ship, for I have seen your righteousness before me in this generation. So here we have some language. Noah is entering the ship because of his righteousness. And just like in the building of the ship, we have the language of the temple. People have to be clean to enter the temple. They have to be ritually pure. Noah is found clean in a sense. He's found to be righteous. And so he enters the temple. And in this sense, he enters the temple. He is saved not because he steers the ship, he captains the ship. No, the ship has no rudder. He's going to be saved by his faith. God called him because of his righteousness. He is then saved by his faith. For I have seen your righteousness before me in this generation. You shall take 7 pairs of every clean animal with you. So here we finally have language of clean and unclean. The male and his female. Of the animals that are not clean, take 2, the male and his female. Also of the birds of the sky, 7 and 7, male and female, to keep seed alive on the surface of all the earth. In 7 days I will cause it to rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. I will destroy every living thing that I have made from the surface of the ground. Noah did everything that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came on the earth. Noah went into the ship with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives because of the flood waters. Clean animals, unclean animals, birds, and everything that creeps on the ground went by pairs to Noah into the ship, male and female, as God commanded Noah. I want you to notice there's no conflation of clean with righteous. The two are not the same, right? Noah enters the ark because of his righteousness, but the animals enter the ark both clean and unclean. And so these categories are not moral categories. They can't be. Otherwise, Noah would enter on a moral category, and they would enter regardless of moral category. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
After the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the sky's windows opened. So here we have kind of strange language to us, because it says the
What are the fountains?
the fountains of the great deep burst open. So the waters are not just coming down, they're coming up.
Mhm.
I think when I see a flood, that's the worst part, is when you see that the flood waters are this murky brown, and you're thinking, you see it flooding through a city, and you know that the waters are also coming up. And that's the worst part. All right, and the sky's windows opened. It rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the same day, Noah and Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered into the ship. They and every animal after its kind, and all the livestock after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. Pairs from all flesh with the breath of life in them went into the ship to Noah. Those who went in, male and female of all flesh, as God commanded him. Then the Lord shut him in. So Noah didn't gather the animals,
They came.
and he didn't close the door. God gathered the animals, and God shuts the door. God sends the rain. God sends the flood. All Noah has to do is obey. But notice Noah isn't morally responsible for what's coming. God has taken that burden from him. The flood was 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and lifted up the ship, and it was lifted up above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ship floated on the surface of the waters. the waters rose very high on the earth. All the high mountains that were under the whole sky were covered. Now, here's part where it diverges with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Because in the Epic of Gilgamesh, all the great and the good, all the rich and the powerful stood on the high mountains and survived, while all the poor in the valleys were washed away. And here we see that God's judgment isn't like the judgment of the other gods, of the other nations. God doesn't respect people just because they're rich.
Right.
His justice is upon the whole earth. Because all the high mountains that were under the whole sky were covered. The waters rose 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh died that moved on the earth, including birds, livestock, animals, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all on the dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. Every living thing was destroyed that was on the surface of the ground, including man, livestock, creeping things, and birds of the sky. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ship. The waters flooded the earth 150 days.
Amazing.
So this story repeats itself quite often. And it's trying to drive home that there's not an exception here. When God sends the flood waters because of the violence, because of the corruption, because of the evil that's in the hearts of every person, when God sends his justice, no one escaped. And it repeats itself over and over again to make that very, very clear. The Torah here is not wasting words in its repetition. It wants you to know, oh, did you think of this one exception? No, it's not there either. Did you think of another way that this story was told, and in that way there was this group over here that survived? Not in this story. All right, chapter 8. God remembered Noah, all the animals and all the livestock that were with him in the ship, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. I always think about that phrase, God remembered Noah. And I kind of think that God is getting carried away. That this is the wrath of God. And God hasn't had to send wrath until now. This wrath is new. This is righteous indignation. And when you have righteous indignation, isn't it easy to get carried away?
Yeah.
But God remembered Noah. And I think that's what tempers his judgment, because God here is angry. And it shows us that God has emotions. That God isn't just this, we're told by John, God is love. Well, that's easy to think that God is this disembodied concept that is transcendent and above all. But God is also right here where we are. And sure, God also gets carried away. God has emotions. God has thoughts. God has feelings. And so God is very much embodied here. God remembered Noah. And we see this throughout the Torah, that there are times that God shows these very human thoughts, human feelings, And in those ways, we get to see ourselves in God. We get to see in which ways we're made in God's image. Not only in those ways, but in the transcendent ways, we hope. So God remembered Noah, all the animals and all the livestock that were with him in the ship, and God made a wind to pass over the earth. The waters subsided, the deep's fountains and the sky's windows were also stopped, and the rain from the sky was restrained. The waters continually receded from the earth, and after the end of 150 days, the waters receded. The ship rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on Ararat's mountains. The waters receded continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were visible. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ship which he had made. He sent out a raven. It went back and forth until the waters were dried up from the earth. He himself sent out a dove to see if the waters were abated from the surface of the ground, but the dove found no place to rest her foot, and she returned into the ship to him. For the waters were on the surface of the whole earth. He put out his hand and took her and brought her to him into the ship. He waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent the dove out of the ship. The dove came back to him at evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from the earth. So here we have a lot of numbers, by the way. We have 40, of course, which we see repeated as a number representing completion, right? It also represents a generation. When the Israelites wandered through the desert for 40 years, it's until that whole generation that had been slaves in Egypt has died. And the next generation is the one that goes into the promised land. So 40 is this number that represents a generation. 7 is another number that we see that represents creation, right? On the 7th day, God rested. And so when it says the dove came back to him, he waited another 7 days and sent the dove out of the ship. The dove came back to him at evening. And there was evening and there was morning. And it reminds us of creation, of the story of creation. That it took those 6 days, and just like in that story, God starts with the water and finishes with the land. And so we have these parallels, and we could look back and forth and we could compare the two stories, and we'd probably find quite a few. But I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to point out that that's there, and we'll keep moving. He waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, and she didn't return to him anymore. So before, the dove found an olive leaf, telling Noah that she had found a place to rest. Now she's left and she doesn't come back anymore, telling Noah she's also found food. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ship and looked. He saw that the surface of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. God spoke to Noah, saying, "Go out of the ship, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, of all flesh, including birds, livestock, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." Noah went out with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, whatever moves on the earth after their families, went out of the ship. I like this language because they went in according to their kinds, but they come out according to their families. It suggests that there's a sort of camaraderie that has developed that
all
wasn't
that-
there
yeah.
before.
For all that time being in there, they would.
Mhm. Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasant aroma. The Lord said in his heart, "I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, because the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. I will never again strike every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed, time, and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night will not cease." So here it gives us the language of creation once again. Noah's ordeal here is the undoing of God's creation, and here God recreates the world. It says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you will be on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the sky, everything that moves along the ground, and all the fish of the sea are delivered into your hand." This language is the language of that God uses when Israel goes to battle and says, and God tells them, the enemy is delivered into your hand. You know, you're going to win the battle. You're going to win the fight. They are in your hands. And in a sense, the animals know it. It says, "Every moving thing that lives will be food for you. As I gave you the green herb, I have given everything to you. But flesh with its life, that is its blood, you shall not eat." In other words, people weren't eating animals before this. Which is interesting because Noah offers a sacrifice of animals, but people weren't eating the animals. So when Cain is raising these livestock, it's not for food. It's probably for wool, maybe for milk, but he's not eating the animals. But maybe he's still sacrificing the animals. We saw Cain offer a sacrifice. Here we see Noah offer a sacrifice. But flesh with its life, that is its blood, you shall not eat. I will surely require accounting for your life's blood. At the hand of every animal I will require it, at the hand of man, even at the hand of every man's brother. Here he reminds us of Cain. I will require the life of man. So he wants to remind Noah that lesson that Cain took away, that I'm just going to keep blessing you no matter how much you sin, no matter how many people you murder, no matter who you disrespect and how. That's not going to continue. I'm not going to just allow murder. And he puts it in Noah's hands. I will surely require an accounting for your life's blood. So, in other words, we have to establish courts of justice. There must be justice in this world. And the reminder of that is that we aren't to eat meat with its blood still in it. We aren't to, and this was a practice at the time, we aren't to eat meat that is still alive. In other words, you can't just chop away a leg from a pig and eat the leg and let the pig live, because that pig's not going to live very well,
Right.
especially without antibiotics.
Right.
You know, you can't do horrible atrocities. You can't treat the animals cruelly. That would be eating the meat with the blood still in it.
That's why I can't eat rare
Mm.
meat, rare steaks,
Mhm.
stuff. I can't.
I kind of wonder with the way that lab-grown meat is going. Have you not heard of that?
With lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is. Yeah. But
Well,
not a whole lot, but I've heard of it, but not extensively.
right. I kind of wonder when they get that to a marketable point, would that still be considered meat with its lifeblood still in it? Because the cow that provided that, the cells that are now being grown as beef, is still alive.
Being cells, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I-
life. Yeah, it's life force cells.
Yeah. But it also doesn't comprise cruelty to that cow. And if this is saying that we should avoid being cruel to the animals, in that way, that lab-grown meat is better because it doesn't involve any cruelty to animals. But in a sense, it still has its lifeblood in it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it transgresses this commandment in the literal sense, but not in the figurative sense, in the point that we're supposed to take away from it. I'm still thinking about how I feel about that, and I think if it ever gets to the point that it's lab-grown meat or becoming a vegetarian, I'm just going to become a vegetarian. Because I think if I have to choose between the figurative or literal sense of a commandment, I'm just going to choose whichever one allows me to follow the commandment, you know? It's something I've been thinking about as I read this.
Yeah, it's food for thought.
Mm-hmm. But the thing that it's supposed to remind us of is that we do not murder.
Right.
If we aren't cruel to animals, we certainly shouldn't murder. And so it's this progression of from the lesser to the greater. You know, if we treat animals with this much respect, we have to treat each other with even more respect. And it says, whoever sheds man's blood, his blood will be shed by man, for God made man in his own image. In other words, when you commit murder, you're not just killing another human being, you are desecrating the idol and image to God. In the ancient world, if you destroyed an idol to a god, you would be executed because you had disrespected that god. You had sought to kill the god. You had made an attempt on that god's life. And here, well, our God has no idols. God has no images except for us. And so God puts it in that language that they'll understand. Going into a land that is full of idols. You're made in the image of God. So if you would be executed for destroying this thing of stone or wood, then you're certainly going to be executed for destroying God's image, his real image, which is humanity. He says, be fruitful and multiply, increase abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every animal of the earth with you, of which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. The sons of Noah who went out from the ship were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. That's the land the Israelites are going into. And so that's why I keep connecting these two things. By the way, did Moses write this about Canaan? Yes, he certainly did. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. So here we're reminded that all of the earth, all humanity, is one great big family.
Right.
That's
We
right.
went into the ark as different kinds, but we come out of the ark as family. And just like the ark is mirrored in the temple, we go into the temple as different kinds. We come out of the temple as family. And the church mirrors the temple. So we go into the church as different kinds, but we come out as family. The idea of this covenant too, there was one of the theologies that competes with covenant theology is dispensationalism. The idea that there are different covenants that God has established at different times, and that each covenant replaces the one that came before it. That the covenant of Moses replaced the covenant of Noah, the covenant of Noah replaced the covenant of Adam, and the covenant of Jesus replaced the covenant of Moses, and so on and so forth, for there are many, many covenants in the Bible. But the covenant of Noah is a very interesting one because it's not just with Noah. It says in verse 16, the rainbow will be in the cloud. I will look at it that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. It's not just with Noah. It's with every living creature on the earth. God has established his covenant. And his promise is that he will not destroy all the creatures of the earth. The covenant that God established with Moses is not with all creatures of the earth. The covenant that God established through Jesus is not with all creatures of the earth. And so if they replaced this covenant, then God has nullified his covenant with the creatures of the earth. And so dispensationalism literally says that God breaks his promises. That's why I don't accept it. You know, there are many variations on covenant theology, and you can look them all up, but the basis of it is this, that God keeps all his promises. And so when God made a covenant with Adam, he kept his promise. When God made a covenant with Noah, he kept his promise for all time. And when God made a covenant that we see with, his name went right out of my head, with Melchizedek, the priest of Jerusalem in the time of Abraham. That covenant is for all time. And so in Hebrews, we see that Jesus is established as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Well, if God's covenants replaced one another, Jesus couldn't be established in the order of Melchizedek because it was an extinct priesthood, replaced by the Aaronic priesthood when God established his covenant with Aaron and Moses. And so dispensationalism also says then that Jesus could never be our high priest, like it says in Hebrews. But because God establishes his covenants for all time, there is never a priesthood that can become extinct. So Jesus is the priest in the order of Melchizedek. But there are also the priests of Aaron, and they are priests for all time. God established his covenant with Israel, and it will stand for all time. He established his covenant with Noah, and that will stand for all time. And through Noah, he has a covenant with all the peoples of the earth and with all the animals. And he gives us this idea of what righteousness means, that we abhor violence, that we abhor war, that we hold one another accountable for the violence that we do to one another. And that is kind of a minimum standard of what he looks for justice for all people. But it does mean that through Noah, God is looking for justice for all people, not just one people, not just through, let's say, Jesus and the ones who get it, not just for the church, but everyone. All right, so these were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Noah began to be a farmer and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and got drunk. Now that's interesting. It first says that these were the sons of Noah, and then it immediately goes on to a different story, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Noah began to be a farmer and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and got drunk. He was uncovered within his tent. Now, if he's uncovered within his tent, is he being modest? He's in his own tent. You know, if you're naked in your own house, you're being modest. Anyone who sees you is a peeping Tom. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Now it says, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. So Noah, I'm just saying, Noah is being modest. He's naked, but he's in his own tent.
Yeah.
Ham goes into Noah's tent, sees his father in a way that he shouldn't. And he goes out and told his two brothers outside. This is another thing he should not be doing. Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it on both their shoulders, went in backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were backwards, and they didn't see their father's nakedness.
Okay.
It's a very strange story.
It is.
And I've heard a lot of strange interpretations of it.
Gosh.
But keep in mind, all of these men are fathers. They
Mhm.
have their own tents. They have their own families.
Right.
Why is Ham going into Noah's tent anyways?
Because he may want to talk to his father. Maybe he wanted to go and talk to,
Or what
you know,
advice?
Noah, check on him.
Maybe,
whatever.
maybe this is completely innocent.
Yeah.
But the story, in a sense, doesn't assume this because the story does assume guilt
On whose part?
on Ham's part. Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him and said, Canaan is cursed. He will be a servant of servants to his brothers. He said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth. Let him dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. Noah lived 350 years after the flood. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and then he died.
Wow.
So there is an assumption of guilt. Ham has done something wrong. But
But we don't know what it is.
we don't know what it is. What we do know is he's gone into his father's tent when his father is naked. And then, okay, that's probably something he shouldn't be doing. He has his own family. He has his own tent. And Noah is a man with a wife, and he's naked in his tent. Stuff could be happening. Ham goes in anyways. I'm just saying,
Well, he could knock at the door. This is a tent.
huh?
I'm
Could
just.
knock.
He could knock at the door because this is a tent.
True.
So we're supposed to take this.
He could have stood by
Story.
the tent and called out his father's name.
He could have. He could have called for his father to come out of the tent,
True. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, it's just like,
Who do you believe?
it's just like when you have your door closed,
Yeah.
do you let your kids just walk on in?
No,
your bedroom?
because they know there's a
No,
reason why
not.
the door's closed.
That's right. And if you let your kids close their door, do you just barge right in? You know, especially
Yeah.
once they're grown? No. Because you know they might be naked, their door's closed. You would embarrass them. And so this is something that even today it goes both ways. If the door's closed, you know someone's in there changing. You know that there's something that's not meant to be seen. It's not necessarily secret, but it is private. Ham has disrespected that privacy. He could be outside the tent. He could call his father out. You know, but what's going on in the tent is definitely private. And we could interpret that any number of ways. It could be Noah and his wife in there. It could be just Noah. It doesn't really matter. Ham has disrespected his privacy in a way that Ham would not accept. Right? If Noah went into Ham's tent while he was naked, Ham wouldn't accept that. Because Ham knows what that means. But it's interesting here. Ham is the only one who is a father at this point. By the way, he is the father of Canaan. And Noah doesn't curse Ham, he curses Canaan. And so this does give us the idea that this is tension between two fathers.
Tension between Noah and Ham.
Noah and Ham. And because Noah is cursing Ham, I think it actually has to do with them disrespecting one another as fathers. And I think that it does hinge on this lack of privacy. In other words, Ham should know better.
Well,
But it's speculation. There could be any number of reasons that this is disrespectful, but it's interesting. His brothers do know better. They walk in backwards. They walk in and don't observe their father, even though Ham has come out with a description. This is something that's also very interesting to me about it. It smacks of locker room talk to me. You know, as a gay man, I have a very interesting perspective on this because I know straight men are very sensitive about their bodies and what they look like naked. And it would be horrifying to them to know that someone had told them um, that size matters, that their privacy had been disrespected in that way. If someone gave a description of them naked, they would be horrified. Now, as gay men, we're not typically horrified by such things. But this isn't a story about gay men. It's a story about fathers. And so I think Ham going out, giving a description of his father naked, also transgresses a boundary that they would have known. And so his brothers don't go in and confirm that description. They go in and make sure that they don't know a damn thing. You know, to me, I think of what it was like to be a teenager and very insecure about my own body. And I think of straight men who have never seen another man naked, and they're very insecure about their own bodies. And
But don't you think that has to do a lot with upbringing, though?
oh yes,
Yeah,
And-
definitely.
and here I see that Noah's other sons know that their father is going to be insecure about his body in the same way that they are, and they go in and respect that, whereas the other son does not. So there's a lot of boundaries being transgressed here. I've heard interpretations that hinge on this being sexual. And I think there are so many interpretations of this that don't. You don't ever have to go there, because the idea of someone's nakedness being exposed, and especially one man to another, of having, even just with men having that size envy. And that's a fear among men. They call it a pissing contest for a reason. And here, that's one level on which Noah is being disrespected. There are other levels as well. And it never gets to a level that's sexual, but it definitely gets to a level in which Noah is being body shamed. So that's another takeaway from this story, is that we definitely have a right to our privacy. We definitely have a right to not being known in ways that we don't want to be known. Not have things exposed about us that we don't want exposed. Because yes, everyone knows what's going on in the tent, but it's still private. But also that we have a right to be respected and to have that respect shown. The other thing that's interesting to me is that Canaan, because this whole thing revolves around tents, Canaan has his right to a tent taken away from him. He will dwell in the tents of others.
Yeah, that this whole thing down here, 25, verse 25, 26, 27,
Mhm.
27, it really bothers me.
It should.
It bothers me a great deal.
Go on.
No, because I feel that the Lord is being very vengeful here.
Mm.
The way he's pushing this on to, he's cursing Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says here, Canaan, he said, cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like,
Yeah.
So
And-
that's why I say I really feel comfortable with all these verses here.
And note, it's not the Lord cursing Canaan, it's Noah.
Noah. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, not the Lord. I'm sorry. I meant Noah.
Yeah, but even so, the Lord has asked that there be an accounting, and here Noah has established one. The first time that there is a transgression where a person does not respect the boundaries of another, and Noah establishes an accounting, and he does it in a way that's symmetrical. One father is not respecting another father. And so he punishes not the father, but the son.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would strike Ham more than if Ham had been cursed. I think that that is to show Ham the error of his ways. That in a way it is, in a way it's reflexive. It's meant to be reflexive, It's meant to show a symmetry of a sort. But the other thing here is something that we'll see quite a lot in the Torah, that there is a simultaneous empathizing of these other nations. They're shown to be family, but they're not. But they're also shown to be fallen away in some way. They're family, but they're not upholding the Lord's standard of righteousness. They're that family. They're those cousins that maybe we don't get along with all the time. So, all right. I think I've flogged a dead horse here with this passage about as long as I can.
Okay.
You have any observations or questions?
Well,
No one online has typed one in yet, so.
I think for me, this chapter here, I mean, this Noah and his sons,
Mm-hmm.
because it has not been, something that I have been aware of, actually, or told. It kind of like sets me kind of like above things. I mean, not above things, but I just don't sit right with it. And that's the way I think. I feel.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows, it kind of tells me a little bit about, God is all about love,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay. And he also is a jealous God
Mm-hmm.
and a vengeful God is what I've heard.
Yeah.
And so it kind of brings me to reality, to understand the three different things he is.
Mm.
And it just puts it at the forefront of my thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
family matters and where the world should be
Oh,
moving
yeah.
along.
Oh, yeah.
In other
And-
words, it opens up more of my knowledge
Mhm.
base.
And this passage, too, it very much mirrors the Garden of Eden, how God creates us and puts us in this perfect situation,
And then we sin.
and given our own
Yeah.
devices,
Yeah. Yeah.
we fall short. And that's definitely what happens here. God, it says Noah walked and talked with God. And we see Noah being righteous. We see Noah upholding the ways the Lord taught him. And then as soon as they're off the ark,
Yeah. Oh,
Ham screws it up.
Yeah. Well. Okay.
The other thing I think is interesting here, you notice Noah has 3 sons.
Mhm.
In a lot of ancient maps, there are 3 continents. There's Europe, Asia, and Africa. And Jerusalem, in one famous map, it has Jerusalem at the center with these 3 petals coming off of it like a flower of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And this is kind of the ancient view of the world, and it's definitely the view of the world from this part of the world, because they're right in the middle of 3 continents and they know it. Even at that time, they knew there were these 3 continents, and they're right in the middle of it. And Noah has 3 sons. And it says, from these 3 sons,
Right.
all of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not
If they started it all.
we're not meant to take that literally, I don't think, but it definitely draws the map for us.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's end it here. Go ahead and end the live stream.